Earlier this week, I had planned on how I wanted to start the message for this Sunday. This is the third Sunday of Advent. It is the story, it is the week of joy as we have lit that candle. And so, what I was going to start out with was by asking you a question and asking you to tell me one thing that brings you joy. As I was working on that and kind of thinking that this is how I wanted to start, is when I got the text message from Debbie saying that she was going to be out for the next couple of Sundays because she was, she would be traveling. And so I said, in the text, well, you won't miss, but so that you won't miss part of the message, please tell me, text me one thing that brings you joy. And so, of course, I'm driving and I get to the place and then I get the text message from her. And she gives me about 8 or 9 things on a list of the things that that bring her joy. And then I said, I that initially was a good idea, but that's not such a good idea to open up the question, because there is a problem that when you ask people certain questions, and that is one question that is included on that list, give me one thing. People don't respond with one thing. It is almost as if people start processing and going through the thing that it's the type of question that people want to give the right answer, because they're thinking you are asking for a particular reason, and so you don't want to go through. And the other thing is that you don't want to be judged, that people don't want to be judged by the answer. So if they say one thing and then I thought you would say this and that. So I'm sure that if I had asked you all the question, that most of you probably would have done similar to what Debbie did, or would have given the other answer, of which I thought I might anticipate is people say, oh, I just can't say one thing. Once again, to divert from trying to say what it is that brings you joy. And I think not only is it because people want to give the right answer, the other thing that causes, I think, people to have some hesitation around that question is because, as I say, they're trying to anticipate what the person wants to hear. But then the other thing is they want to know, and they guard themselves if they find them in a place where joy may be difficult. Certainly, even as we have gone through our own time of prayer today, there are just times in our lives where we find ourselves really struggling with joy. And so we don't want to acknowledge that we're doing that. And so when people start talking about and making preparations, and in this season that we have, there are just some people of whom joy is so elusive to them at a moment that they completely try to avoid situations of where they have to deal with the issue of joy. But I am one who believes that in the season of Advent, that we are invited to take a look at that, even from the standpoint of not only what it is that brings us joy, but what is it that stands in the way of our joy? And say, most of us get to the place of thinking of Advent, and quite honestly, for me, for a long time, I didn't really think of Advent. Because used to be starting on the first Sunday in December. They would have the Christmas parade, and they would go down West End, and everybody would go and get their cars and park on the side of the road and walk up so that they could see the parade. And at the end of the parade, there was, I think was it the gas company that sponsored it? Yeah, gas company. There'd be Santa Claus. And so the clock had struck. It's now this time of thinking of Christmas. And when you're thinking of Christmas and coming in, nobody wants to be around anybody that's not dealing with joy. And even if you don't have any joy, you got to fake it. And in some cases, the faking of it puts us in places where we really end up being more abusive to ourselves because we're trying to display something that we really are having a hard time with. I imagine that when people were putting together the lectionary passages and we got the passage that we come in, that people probably heard question, why are we dealing with these issues? In particular, why are we dealing with John the Baptist? We had John the Baptist last week and John the Baptist again this week. We're dealing with a 30-year-old man who's got some issues and going on in his life. We're supposed to be talking about and getting ready for a baby to come. We don't even deal with the baby until next week. And next week, it's too late. I mean, if you have not already ordered your stuff from Amazon, trust me, it is not going to get here before Christmas. And that if you even dare to go and attempt in the mall, all of the stuff has been picked over. And at least that is left is never in the size you need it. So word of advice, always get the size that's too small rather than getting the one that's that's over. I learned that as a young person, It's better to say, oh, I thought you were this size, knowing good and well you're not going to put that size 6 dress on that 14 body. But, go take it back. But we find ourselves in this season and we're confronted with John the Baptist. And how does that in this moment in this season where we're focusing in on hope and peace and joy, John the Baptist comes in? It took me a while, but I think that the reason that we have John the Baptist in the story is because for most of us, we find ourselves kind of being like John the Baptist this season. We find ourselves asking ourselves a lot of questions and doing a lot of wondering. We particularly thought that things might be a little different as we came out of last year, that things certainly will be different this Christmas and moving along, that yet we find ourselves struggling with some stuff. for I can be honest with you and admit in my own story. You know, much of this year, it has been a struggle of holding on to hope and peace and joy. Some of it's just been like, oh, wow. All of the madness that is going on in the world, all of the things. I mean, and I was thinking as I say, here we are in a season and we're supposed to be anticipating the parties we will have, all of the celebrations that we're supposed to be doing. And yet there are people who are wondering if they'll be able to pay their utility bills, if they'll be able to afford food. And then instead of waiting on and thinking about the Christmas card, you're getting a notice that will say that your insurance will be 4 times what it was last year. Where is the joy? That's why I think it is good. I have no idea that what the people who decided on it were thinking about. I know that they did not look into the future to see what was going on in 2025 and knowing that we would have this. But they also knew that whether we're looking at 2025 or we go back and look, there's always these circumstances and situations in our world where we find ourselves like John the Baptist, asking questions. For John, who we know was the one who was proclaiming the one would come and would be in our midst, who would change things around, who would deal with all of the problems, who would turn this world that was upside down, would come and turn it right side up. The one who would come in and deal with these abusive powers. We're looking for one who would come, who would stand up and to say to the Donald Trumps of the world, no, you can't do what you're doing. Would say to the court system that come up with these outlandish rulings, you are wrong in what you're doing, that you have got to, instead of having people go hungry, instead of buying and destroying crops because you can't sell them overseas, would instead give it to the people who are hungry, who would give adequate funding to our schools, not just so that they would teach the test, but so that our children might learn. John had predicted and had thought all of that was coming. And yet now John finds himself in prison. And he's been talking about for a while, one is coming, and he had kind of anticipated that it would be Jesus, but surely if the promise was Jesus, things surely would have been a little different for him. And so John sends messengers, and he sends them to Jesus, and he says and tells them when they ask Jesus to ask, are you the one? And I had the opportunity to preach this passage a few months ago, a couple of months ago, and it was probably right then. You don't want to hear this at Christmas time. But he asked the question, are you the one? Or should we wait on another. I admire John because John believed in the promise. The promise that had been spoken to him, and while he had thought it would be Jesus, his question was not about the promise, but his question about the one that I thought would be the one. That he didn't give up on the promise that things would get better, but he did have some doubt. And that's the first thing that I want to say to you in this, and as you're going through this season, that this passage helps us. That if you are struggling with joy, I want you to know that you're not by yourself. Well, certainly, I mean, and what is so wild about it, Jay, people on both sides, and if we were just going to put it in a political perspective, people on both sides thought things would be different. Even DT's folk who said, oh, well, the first day I'm in, things are going to happen. Even they are disappointed. Things are not happening. And people are asking the question, is this the one? And the people go and they go see Jesus. And this is the part about the story that I like the best, is that he goes in, they ask Jesus, they relay the message, and Jesus does not answer it. Now, that lets me know I'm not Jesus. Because if he'd have come and asked me and I'd have been Jesus, I would have said to them, oh yeah, go tell John, I'm the one. I'm the man. I'm the one you've been talking to. It's just that, John, I've been busy. I've been having all these speaking engagements. I've been dealing with all of these things. And I just tell John, as soon as my schedule permits, I'll come and see you. I'll check you out, and we'll have, a good conversation. Hang in there. I'm the one. But Jesus doesn't do that. Jesus says, tell him what you saw. And they go back and they tell John that the blind see, the lame walk, folk who are hungry are being fed, people who are being incarcerated wrongly are being set free. Go tell them what you see. And while we don't hear in the story, and it doesn't tell us just exactly what happened with the conversation, we can understand that when they report these things, that for John, that John could say is that while it might not have been happening for me, it is happening. That I believe that there was a sense of joy for him to say, yeah, I'm struggling, but the one I believe in is doing great and wonderful things. That he is turning it upside down. That he is standing in opposition. And that's an invitation for us. That sometimes we just can't be so focused in on ourselves. that we forget to look and see what's going on and what's happening around us within our community. That's what this Advent season of where we are having the anticipation and the waiting is, that the invitation is for us not to do it alone in the midst of our isolation, because then we can be consumed. But we have to set it in community. Yes, as I was looking at all of the madness that was going on in all of the things that are happening around in our community this week, and I really was at a point of where, I was dealing with the depression of just, I'm being bombarded with this stuff. And I get the text from Carissa. While I'm out here bad mouthing and saying, our schools are just not doing anything, our schools are this, I'm looking at all these kids that are arguing and fighting and doing all of this stuff, I get a text message. While I'm listening to a conversation that are talking about all of these welfare moms that have destroyed the system, all of these single moms, these single black women who have torn down, and we have spent all this. I get a text message from a woman that I can't imagine that there being a better mom. And it brought me joy. The joy of knowing that God is still moving in our midst. That the promises that God made, the promise that we look at the coming of Jesus into the world, is still the promise that we are living into. That yes, we can believe in the promise that was, that is, and if God has done it, if God is doing it, then I can have faith that God will do it. But sometimes you got to wait your turn. But even more so than sometimes you got to wait your turn, sometimes you got to accept the fact that it might not happen for you. But it doesn't mean that joy is not real. No. And I'm going to share this, and then I'm going to let you all go. And I think this passage does one other thing, and it presents us. That it challenges us in the season of Advent is to look at the things and evaluate what brings us joy. And in our evaluation of it, there are three things that our evaluation may tell us that we need to do. The first thing, I'll give you the three things. Either we need to give up, let go, or hang on. Now, I know that those first two, the giving up and the letting go kind of sound like the same kind of thing, but there is a little difference in them, and I want to share with it. And I want to share with, in giving the example, I want to be honest with you and give what has been my experience since I've gone into ministry. And so for me, I want to deal with the joy, because I really find joy in relationship. And so this passage, as I say, I had to evaluate. There's some relationships that I have had, the first one, that somebody comes into your life, and I'm one that likes to, I used to say all the time, one time, if you come to Hobson one time, it might have been an accident. If you come twice, then we got to figure out why that happened. And I believe that sometimes there are people of whom God sends our way, and then there are sometimes there are people of whom the devil sends our way. But you have to be in relationship, and you have to be able to sort through that to be able to find out where they are. And then I've found that there are some people of whom, no matter what I did or what I attempted to do to have them to be a part of the community and for me to be a part of their lives, to find some joy, it just didn't work out. And the reason that it did not work out is that there was no promise. There wasn't anything about it that was built on relationship. Most of the time, it was built upon what they could get, and they took advantage. Because I'm trying to do these things, I'm trying to connect, I'm trying to do what I think God expects me to do, and I'm bending over backwards and doing all that stuff, and I'm doing, and then I realized that whatever I did, it was either never right or never enough. And I kept giving and trying and doing all that stuff, that I got to the point where I realized that the relationship had no meaning to it. And when I found out that there was no promise, that it was not going anywhere, that it was not having any meaning to it, then I had to give it up. Ain't no use to continue to do this. This ain't even going in a circle, because at least in the circles you haven't anticipating getting back. No, this is a straight line going nowhere. And it is nothing worse than being on a ship that goes nowhere. And so you had to give it up. The other times, and the other one, the letting go. Person comes into my life, comes to the church, we come in, first time, visitors, second time they come back, and you try to figure out, okay, why is this person here? And there is a connection that takes place, and you're kind of working on that, and you're dealing with that, and you find out that they bring something to me, I bring something to them. We're able to work on some things. We find some common ground, some common area of where, this can work out. And there are moments of where in the relationship where there is a sense of joy, that you enjoy the company, you enjoy the vision. There's something that stimulates out of both of you. And it goes well. But at the same time that it's going well, it got to a point where it didn't go bad, but it didn't go anywhere, where it stopped moving. You were kind of just at a place. And you realize, or I realized, that in kind of trying to figure out what was going on, that sometimes there are seasons that we go through. And that there maybe were other things that were happening in the lives, in their lives, in my life, that it made the connection difficult. And that you kept trying, but you kept missing the mark, so to speak. Because, I would try to do what I used to do, but I wasn't getting, I used to do results. And it may have been no fault of either one of us. It was just that it had gotten to its place. I experienced some of that last year when I got to the thing. This past year, I'm dealing with my own issues of health. There were things I couldn't do, and energy I had. I saved my energy for Mason, and so people understood. And so it got to the point where you let it go. And in letting go, I could still celebrate that joy had been there. That it wasn't that somehow that we were angry or we were disappointed with one another. We had just gotten to a place of where we could let go and celebrate. And I think that's where a part of the Advent and part of where John was, is that we can celebrate that, yes, God had brought us together. That God had brought us together for a time and a season where we needed one another. But now it's a time that we can move on. But we move on not because we're angry, but because we have fulfilled to a degree what God intended us to be. But then there are the others. And that's where the ones that says you hang on. And those are the ones of where I have found the greatest joy. Because see, those are the relationships that are grounded in what we want to see happen, but are grounded in what we want to be. To be able to be in a relationship and allow the relationship to grow and to know that we are being responded. It's not kind of predicting out at a point and say, okay, we got to do this, we got to do that. It is about being a presence. And see, that's where I think John was when he got the thing back. Yeah, you know what? Boy, I am so happy for him. And that even though I might be going through some stuff, I know he still cares about me. I care about him, and I go through and we go. And the reason I think that many of us don't ever get to that point of accepting that some relationships they don't always have to be 50-50 kind of relationships. At some point in time, maybe I'm required to do 90% and you're 10, but it floats because it is based upon the situations that we're in and that we're doing it without taking score. That too many of us have relationships that are built, and our desire for joy is built on what is reciprocal. You give me $1, I give you $1. It is about keeping up. And that's why we find ourselves sometimes, well, I can't be friends with certain people because they can't do what I do. Or we can't go to the same. I'm not picking up the bill all of the time. But when you find yourself in that relationship where you know that God has brought you together, you act out of instinct rather than acting out of how you keep score. That it is about a presence in one's life. It's about knowing that God is in control, that God has brought us together, that it is about God using us. That's why I find joy in this community. And it is, in some ways, people will say, oh, that's just a simple thing. But it is an important thing. I find joy when I can start off service before service and I get a hug from Gail. A moment of saying, you know, I've been looking forward to this. It's a joy when I get a message from Pam saying, make sure you send me the prayers. You're a little late today. It's moments of joy. That joy, even though sometimes it was I couldn't see, or I was uncomfortable, I was cold. But I enjoyed going out and seeing Kobe. And the joy came when people would say, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "I'm coming seeing one of my sons." It's joy because we're in community. It's real joy. And it doesn't mean, and when it is real joy, you hang in there in the difficult times. You don't walk away. And you know because God made a promise to you. And that the God who made a promise and promised to send the world this little baby, a God who then promised to be with us, even when the baby was no longer present. And the God who said, I will send and I will come again. That I can celebrate that promise each and every time I'm in the presence of you all. And when I find that kind of relationship that affirms that promise, that's something I have to hang on to. And I can hang on to it even when things are not going well. Because if things didn't go all the way well for John the Baptist, then I don't have anything to complain about. Because John hung in there even though things didn't go right. And I can hang in there. And I can, because for me, this Advent joy is a joy that has already happened. And it is joy that's not yet. That I look forward. I celebrate what each of you already meant in my life. I give thanks for what you are doing, but I am still looking forward to even more joy. Closing with this, and I hope you will understand. When I asked the question of Debbie, and I didn't ask the question of you, is that most of us rush Janet to answer the question, what makes us happy? And happiness is not joy. Happiness are those external things that are temporary. Joy is much deeper. When I was thinking about when I was going to ask the question, what brings me joy? Caramel cake. Caramel cake doesn't bring me joy. Caramel cake makes me happy. Being with Mason, that brings me joy. Standing in this circle at the end of service and seeing you all mess with one another, that brings me joy. Yes, you are right now. Because that means you all trust that the promises are for each and every one of us. And that brings me joy. And I hope in this Advent season that as you analyze those things that bring you joy, that you find many times to celebrate the joy in your lives. Amen. Sheila's, I guess.